United States were extremely limited. They were not allowed prominent positions in government and were restricted to coverture. They were expected to stay at home, tending to the house and children. Almost none had received an education or had a career. They couldn't own property. They weren't allowed to be independent either. After enduring this unjust treatment for many years, women across the states resolved to make a change in the late 1800s. They began by exploring their current limitations and setting out to join the abolitionist movement in the 1830s, another cause that American women were particularly engaged in. Some women became important figures in this movement, speaking to crowds and gaining support. This, however, was not accepted socially, and they were therefore criticized. They set out to the World Anti-Slavery Convention in 1840. Yet again, they were ruthlessly quarreled over. Some men argued they should be able to participate, while other men denied this. Eventually, it was deemed a solution to have the women silently listen in from behind the curtain in the back of the room. This humiliated the women and caused them to see a need for change, thus beginning a near century-long fight for women's rights. For 72 years, American women struggled to achieve the right to vote. They wanted to feel like true citizens. The struggle was such a long process that the vital leaders of the movement did not live to see their life goal achieved.
Men were the only ones who had true citizenship rights, and especially men who owned property. So women were not allowed to own property, so it was really hard for them to be considered as citizens based on the early conceptions of citizenship. So, it just was ingrained within the culture that women did not have the same rights as men, that they had other responsibilities to the nation, but not voting. Part of it was that politics was seen as really kind of a nasty business. And so this public sphere, or anytime one stepped into the public, it was not seen as an appropriate place for women.
Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Lucy Stone all worked tirelessly to make their dream a reality. Their starting point was the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention. In the summer of 1848, 5 women sat around a dining table planning the Seneca Falls Convention. Little did they know their tea-time talk would jumpstart one of the biggest movements in history. After 2 days, attendees signed their name to the Declaration of Sentiments. This declaration was mainly written under Elizabeth Cady Stanton's guidance, and it was adapted from the Declaration of Independence, mainly the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," meaning women should have the right to vote. However, it also requested a range of women's rights, including equal education, equal treatment under the law, and the right to vote. 68 women and 32 men signed the Declaration of Sentiments. It led to a spread of the cause, and it earned great publicity. It was printed in an abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator.
This served as kind of a creation, a space for women's suffrage leaders to come together, have this kind of community of womanhood, community of leadership, out of which many of the leaders that the early leaders developed. So, it emboldened them, it gave them confidence, it gave them a chance to kind of strategize their arguments, and their arguments were not that unique, and they just went back to the founding documents and said, this is what citizenship is defined as. Here you have citizenship and the ideal, we're left out. So, it's using the arguments that the U.S. used when its break to Britain against the country to say, we were founded on these principles, but half of the population is left out. So,
after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed. The 13th abolishing slavery, the 14th was equal protection under the law, and the 15th said that voting rights could not be restricted because of race, not sex. Across the nation, smaller groups began to assemble. They each held their own conventions and planned their own steps. Sadly, the movement went through a period of detachment where different groups worked separately. One important group formed the American Equal Rights Association in 1866, so African American women could fight alongside them. Another group was the American Women's Suffrage Association, which wanted an amendment to give rights to women. Through 1876 and 1878, the American Women's Suffrage Association proposed multiple documents and amendments to the government. The Women's Suffrage Amendment, proposed in 1878, would be the document to outline women's rights, although it was not to be adopted until 41 years later. Lastly,
Women's Christian Temperance Unions were the largest and most powerful supporters of the movement. After the forces joined nearly 20 years later, they were stronger than ever and had much more success. Their strategy was to go state by state and eventually achieve voting rights for women in Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, and Colorado, the first four of many more to follow in the years long after.
They had to be enduring because although they received great support, they were also faced with harsh sexism. They were fought against because men believed that they would just vote according to their husband or father. Sexism began early on, when the cause was ridiculed on the national news. Many thought that the movement was not feminine, calling the women who participated manly, and thus humiliating them through the press. In another case, the free love scandal, women such as Frances Wright were continuously shamed for their views on marriage. Frances Wright fought church influence in politics because she wanted women to have rights pertaining to marriage, such as divorce and birth control. Another important example is that of 1853, where Susan B. Anthony and Antoinette Brown were not able to speak in the World Temperance Convention. This fueled their fire even more. Nearly all press was good press, because although it did not always show the movement in good light, it shone a spotlight upon women's suffrage. This quickly spread the movement, and the support the women were backed up with overpowered the negativity they faced.
In the start of the 20th century, more momentum was brought to the movement. They started parades and protests, heading towards Washington, D.C. in an attempt to gain the vote. They more than often picked on the White House and its actions, which many served jail time for. In 1913, President Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated, and his stance regarding women's suffrage alternated. In the beginning of his presidency, he was not for women's suffrage. However, he started supporting it in 1918. He increased women's involvement in World War I. Women worked in factories to produce goods that were needed for the war. They were also substituted as nurses, ambulance drivers, and more. This bettered society's view of women and helped them to be taken seriously. Woodrow Wilson even proposed an amendment to Congress, although it was not accepted. In 1919, the Susan Anthony Amendment was passed. The amendment needed 2/3 majority of the states to pass it in order to grant women's suffrage. States in the South were against women's suffrage, while states in the North tended to support it. Because of the evenly varying beliefs, the 2/3 rule came down to one state, Tennessee. Since Tennessee was in the South, it did not have a very good chance of agreeing with the amendment. The decision was eventually made by Tennessee's Harry Burns. With Burns' vote, the 19th Amendment was eventually ratified. Finally, their goal had been achieved. After nearly 70 years of oppression, they finally emerged victorious. Suffragettes' constant exchange of wisdom and vision guided them through the negativity that they were faced with, and it only made them stronger. As Alice Paul said, there will never be a new world order until women are a part of it.